To quote William Shakespeare, all's well that ends well. And this one statement speaks volumes. Throughout the years, we have seen great franchises failing to strike an impactful landing. This shows how difficult it is to give a solid conclusion and is something that needs to be acknowledged. That's why today I'll be talking about some of the greatest ending chapters in a film series. Please note that this is a personal ranking and it's fully based on my opinion. Films on this list are ranked on the basis of quality, the difficulty level from a storytelling perspective, and the conclusion of the story and the characters. So you might see some better made films little lower than the others depending on the scenario. I have also included trilogies here as some of the trilogies were extremely difficult to end from a filmmaking standpoint. So without wasting a second, let's start the countdown. Number 10. Back to the Future 3. Now, this is a trilogy which is very dear to everyone. A lot of people grew up watching these films, and although the first one is kind of flawless in my opinion, the second and the third one aren't just on that level. But hey, that doesn't mean that they aren't any good.
Yeah, I have, Doc. And Clint Eastwood never wore anything like this.
Marty and Doc Brown are two of the most iconic characters out there. They were even the inspiration behind Rick and Morty, if you don't know that. So it's important to give these characters a solid conclusion, and the film delivers on that part. My issues with this film are it's kind of filled with Western cliches, and although I'm a huge fan of the Western genre, it didn't excite me much. Another one is I feel that they played a little too safe at the end. I think they shouldn't have made Doc return to 1985 to have that encounter with Marty. They should have just ended with Marty in 1985 believing that Doc is finally living a happy life with Clara. Also, is it just me or at times it feels like they're overdoing with exposition and coincidences?
Mary, babe, your loving father.
Number 9. The Godfather Part 3. Although not nearly as good as its predecessors, it still beautifully shows the collapse of a person and his empire, and how it affects a person mentally and physically. One of my favorite things about the Godfather trilogy is Michael's arc. In the first film, we see him as a person who wants to distance himself from his family business.
That's my family, Kay. It's not me.
But is forced to take on the role as the Godfather for the love of his family. And by the end of the film, he ends up distancing himself from the ones he loved, which turns him into something very sinister in the next film, where he had to kill someone from his family, the very family for which he became the Godfather. In the third one, we see him as a man running away from what he has become. He is remorseful about the past and even tries to end his mafia roots. The most intriguing part is, for the first time, he shows compassion, but the price for that ends up being the fall of his empire. Yes, there are quite a lot of negatives about this film. Like, do I even need to mention that Sofia Coppola was lifeless as Mary? Also, the script felt rushed, with a lot of important elements missing, particularly Tom Hagen's character written out of the film.
My brother Tom Hagen is Kay Adams.
How do you do?
But I think most of this was because of the behind-the-scenes drama, and it's commendable that Francis Ford Coppola still managed to make a good film while dealing with all the roadblocks.
Light it up.
Number 8. The Dark Knight Rises. The conclusion to Chris Nolan's highly successful Dark Knight trilogy gives us one of the most satisfying ending in comic book movie history, while giving us another memorable antagonist in Tom Hardy's Bane.
Do you feel in charge?
The Dark Knight Rises shows Bruce Wayne at his lowest in the aftermath of The Dark Knight. And I said Bruce Wayne, not Batman, because for a good chunk of this film, he's not in his costume, and that really humanizes the character. He's damaged both physically and mentally, even financially. And thankfully, Batman isn't too over the top about it, like this guy. Bruce Wayne has to climb up from the pit of loss he has fallen into both mentally and physically. And the pit sequence is the literal personification of his rise as the Cape Crusader. Now, there are some issues in this film, like they should have given more time to his recovery, although that period was kind of very quick for me. I don't know about others, but for me it was kind of very quick. They could have given more time to develop that. Also, can someone explain how did he teleport from one part of the earth to another without any resources in his hands? And also there is this consistent problem with Nolan's Batman trilogy, that is the lackluster action sequences. Although this one did improve on the last one, but there are still some sequences which are just bland to watch, to say the least. And then there is Christian Bale's throat cancer voice as Batman.
You have my permission to die.
Yeah, speaking like this doesn't make you sound cool, Batman. Keeping that aside, this is a great ending chapter with excellent performances, specifically from Anne Hathaway, who probably gave one of the best performances as a comic book character. I don't know why people don't talk about her performance that much. It's just mesmerizing to watch.
Oops. Nobody told me it was uncrackable.
Number 7. Before Midnight. Now, this film is easily one of my favorite in this list. Richard Linklater, along with, someone like Quentin Tarantino, are the masters of the dialogue-driven narrative. They know how to curate a dialogue-driven film without boring the audience for a single second. They will lock you to the screen from start to finish, and even after the credits roll, you don't feel like moving because you are so invested and so lost in that film.
Books?
I've read a few. Sure, yeah.
This film is excellently crafted, and if I'm being honest, it is very difficult to add a sequel to the Before series, as these films are so subtle and nuanced, and Linklater totally knocked this one out of the park. The two follow-ups to Before Sunrise are very organic. They are very fluid, and they never feel like they were just shoved in to make some money like most of the sequels feel like these days. Whenever they came up with a sequel, they genuinely had a story to tell. The reason why Before Midnight is so low on this list because I particularly don't see it as an ending. I think I can still see a room for another one. Although I do consider this as an ending chapter, that's why it's on the list, but it's like Linklater likes a bit ambiguous end for these films as seen in the past two chapters. He leaves something for the audience to fill the gap, and though in Before Midnight there isn't much gap to fill, I can still see him adding one more to the series if he feels like after a few years down the line. But if he plans to end it here, well, that's excellent because this is a great conclusion for these characters.
It must have been one hell of a night we're about to have.
Number 6. The World of Appu, aka Appu Sansar. The Appu trilogy, consisting of Patthar Panchali, Aparajato, and The World of Appu, is one of the greatest trilogy in the world and the gem of Indian cinema. Satyajit Ray, with an amateur crew at that time, gave us one of the greatest stories spanning over 3 films, which is immortal in the world of cinema. This is a very simple story filled with a lot of heart and emotions. But as you rewatch these films, you can see the depth in that simplicity. This film series shows life, death, and everything in between, and how the poorest of the poor can have richer moments than the wealthiest person out there. My favorite part about this trilogy is even though Appu is played by 4 different actors, I never felt like I was watching a different person. And for that, a lot of credit goes to the actors and the filmmaker. This film particularly shows Appu as a grown man who has seen tough days and has lost everyone he loved. He hides his pain behind his evergreen smile and is hesitant to take any major decision in his life. From the start, we see him as a man running away from his life. He drops out of college, he is hesitant to do a job, he is hesitant to marry, and after dealing with another major loss, he gives up on his novel. But in the end, he warmly accepts his life, which is personified as his son, from whom, just like his life, he was running away. The end result is an emotionally satisfying scene where he is seen carrying his son on his shoulders towards a new beginning.
Got a friend in me.
Number 5. Toy Story 4. Now, I was very skeptical about this one, particularly because I thought this story concluded with Toy Story 3, and I thought this was solely made to cash some money, but as you all can see, I was so wrong about this. I was so wrong.
Boy, you got a friend in me.
Although this might not be as good as the original 3, it does stand shoulder to shoulder with them. At the beginning, I thought they were just repeating themselves by making the human character have a new favorite, just like the first Toy Story, but the reaction from the toy is different this time, as we have seen them evolve in the last 3 films. Woody, as we see him, is trying too hard to belong at this place. He's trying to fit in, but he just couldn't. And this is a story about him finding the right place where he belongs in something that he used to despise. And that's a really beautiful character arc, and the film totally nails it.
You're a lost toy?
That's
awful.
Great, huh?
I mean, awfully great that you are lost.
Even though we thought they kind of concluded the story with the third one, this doesn't feel like an unnecessary addition at all, and it totally earned the spot in the highly acclaimed film series.
To infinity and beyond.
I could say you were a good pupil, but the words would choke me.
Number 4. Logan. Logan gave us the last performance of Hugh Jackman as Wolverine and Patrick Stewart as Professor X, and their best one as these characters.
What a disappointment you are.
Again, much like many other characters on this list, we see them at their lowest and a shadow of their former selves. Charles has developed dementia and is responsible for the end of X-Men, whereas Logan is just running away from himself and wants to die, which is also literally displayed in this film as they are constantly on the run. This film is a big departure from the conventional superhero films. It has no flashy costumes, no hero shots, and no big beam in the sky final battle. It is more close to a neo-western than a big superhero film, and I love it for that. Now, people criticize this film for not having a strong villain, but I don't see it that way. I see this film as Logan's inner struggle between his dark, defeated side and his bright, optimistic side, which James Mangold brilliantly personified as the character X-24 and Laura. When his dark, defeated side brought him down to his knees and overpowered him, it was his bright side that banished the darkness and held his hand firmly and took him out of the pit where he was at the beginning of the film. What a lovely way to send off an iconic character.
This is what it feels like.
Avengers!
Assemble.
Number 3. Avengers Endgame. I know you were expecting this higher on this list, probably number 1, but let me explain. Avengers Endgame although concludes one of the biggest and the most difficult storyline out there and gives a memorable closure to some of the most iconic characters in this universe, but from a filmmaking standpoint, it's just above average.
No, I don't think I will.
For starters, I believe that Infinity War was a much better film than Endgame in almost every department. Endgame lacked that strong pacing of Infinity War and was filled with underwhelming dialogue
You think is coursing through my veins right now.
Cheese whiz.
and major plot holes. Also, if I'm being honest, this battle sequence felt like a mess after everyone entered. But Endgame is still a remarkable film, and I'll tell you why. In 2019, we saw Game of Thrones, Star Wars, and the X-Men franchise concluding their saga, but all of them failed miserably. All these franchises, in terms of scale, were as big as the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Yet, they failed to impress even the general audience. Whereas Endgame satisfied almost every single fan out there. And let me tell you one thing. Each fan speaks with a different voice. In simple words, everyone wants a different thing to be satisfied, and it is not an easy feat to impress the fan base of Marvel Cinematic Universe, which might just be the biggest fan base out there, and leave everyone emotionally satisfied. And that's one of the major reasons why this film is here on such a high spot. I bet some of the greatest filmmakers of all time cannot do what the Russos achieved here.
We're gonna be okay.
I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. Come on!
Number 2. Lord of the Rings: Return of the King. The conclusion to the greatest trilogy ever made. The Lord of the Rings: Return of the King might just be Peter Jackson's magnum opus. What he achieved with this franchise is unparalleled, and much like Satyajit Ray's Appu trilogy, all three films are on par with each other. Much like Endgame, there was a lot riding on its shoulders, and although Endgame had more characters, I think Return of the King had more arcs to conclude, and it's a much better film than Endgame from a filmmaking standpoint. My favorite part is how beautifully it handles all the subplots and the character arcs without snapping you out of the film. There is a lot happening in this film, and yet it never feels like a mess. The battle sequences are beautifully shot with genuine character moments in between.
That still only counts as one.
For example, just look at this moment. It's clearly a very forced moment with no build-up, and it feels like the filmmaker shoved it at the last moment because this sells in this era. Now, look at this moment.
No man can kill.
This moment was highly anticipated, and it had a proper build-up, and when it happened, it was immensely satisfying.
I am no man.
Stay close to me.
Always.
Number 1. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. In my opinion, Deathly Hallows Part 2 is the perfect ending in every regard. This is a franchise which is filled with countless characters like Endgame. It is based on rich and highly acclaimed fantasy novels like The Lord of the Rings, and like both of them, it had a huge fan following.
Fine.
And yet, it ends up giving one of the most satisfying ending in every regard. This is a very fast-paced film, but you never feel like they are rushing in. Like how in the first Avengers film, the film picks up already built-up characters and assemble them together while simultaneously polishing the characters further. Deathly Hallows Part 2 does the same with them, but instead of assembling, it ends their arc perfectly while giving some genuinely beautiful character moments. And that's a very difficult task to do because it's easier to develop a character arc over a film than to end an already perfected arc. And this film not only does that for the titular character, but also for so many others, specifically for Severus Snape, who might just be my favorite character in this franchise. And out of all the emotionally satisfying moments in this film, this montage might just be the most emotionally satisfying scene in this whole list.
Always.
So I hope you liked the video, and if you did, please like, share and subscribe, and I'll be back shortly with the next video.